A red-tailed hawk soared overhead, dark against the pale sky, and the wind picked up. It looked more like snow than ever. You could practically smell it in the wind. "Is Celine at your house?" Brody asked. I shook my head. "The O'Neills took her home with them last night. That's where I'm going." "Can I come with you? I want to see that girl." He and I and the dog walked on down the road. Snow began falling. Bella snapped at the flakes, and Brody opened his mouth like a kid and caught snow on his tongue. Even though I was half crazy with worry about my sister, I did the same. I've always loved the way snow feels on my tongue. When we got to the O'Neills' house, the snow was at least half an inch deep, falling fast and thick now, making it hard to see. Trees blurred, fields blended in with the sky, and the house was no more than a faint outline against the smudge of the woods behind it. Mrs. O'Neill opened the door wide and let us all in, even Bella, who immediately made herself at home in front of the fire. "You must be freezing," she said. Brody stopped in the living room doorway and stared at Celine, who was sitting on the couch beside Mr. O'Neill. A photo album lay open in his lap, but she seemed more interested in combing little Erica's hair than in looking at the pictures. She didn't appear to notice the dog, Brody, or me. "Get those wet shoes off, boys, and dry your feet by the fire," Mr. O'Neill said. "How's your father doing, Brody?" "About the same." Brody busied himself taking off his shoes and laying them carefully on the hearth. He had already shed his jacket and hung it on the back of a wooden chair in the corner. "He ain't found a job yet." I put my hiking boots beside his worn-out tennis shoes. It always makes me feel guilty to have better stuff than other people. Something's wrong with the world that lets me have waterproof boots and someone else have tennis shoes with holes in the toes. I looked at Celine, but she kept her eyes on the doll. Mr. O'Neill nudged her. "Aren't you going to say hello to Daniel? You haven't met Brody before. He lives on the other side of your old home, just over the bridge." Without looking at either one of us, she shook her head. She wore a gray plaid dress and a dark green sweater. Her hair had been combed until it was free of tangles. If you didn't look too closely, you'd think Celine was a perfectly normal girl, maybe a little shy, but nothing out of the ordinary. When she finally raised her head and stared at us with those pale green eyes, you could see right away that she was different, not normal after all, a wild child with wild ways. Brody actually took a step back when he saw Celine's pale, pointed face and her fierce eyes. For a moment, I thought he was going to grab his jacket and shoes and leave, but he stayed where he was, wiping his nose and staring at the girl. Ignoring Brody's reaction to Celine, Mr. O'Neill motioned for us to join him. "I'm showing Celine some pictures. Maybe you'd like to see them too." I sat beside him on the opposite side of Celine. Brody perched next to me on the arm of the sofa, ready to head for home if he needed to. He was a little wild himself, but nothing like Celine. "This is my daughter's first grade class picture." Mr. O'Neill pointed at the tall, dark-haired girl in the back row of a faded black and white print. "That's Eleanor." Glancing at Celine, he moved his finger slowly to a child sitting in the middle of the front row. "And this is Celine." Celine faced the camera, a big grin on her face. Like the other girls, she wore a dress with a round collar, very much like the one she's wearing now. Her curly red hair touched her shoulders. Brody leaned past to see me. "It's her, all right." We both looked at Celine. With her face turned away from the photo album, she continued to comb little Erica's hair. "Celine disappeared not long after that picture was taken," Mr. O'Neill went on. "I've been showing her pictures taken here at our house." I looked at a page of snapshots of Celine and Eleanor. It was hard to believe that the frightened, unhappy kid sitting with us on the sofa had once hung upside down by her knees from a tree limb, ridden a bike, splashed in a swimming pool, and made silly faces. "This is Celine's mother." Mr. O'Neill pointed to a pretty woman pulling both girls on a sled on a snowy day and smiling at the camera. "And her father. See? That's Celine on her dad's shoulders. She must have been 2 or 3. Mrs. O'Neill joined us then. "Don't you want to look at the pictures, Celine?" she asked gently. "It might help you remember your family, and who you are." Keeping her head down, Celine said, "I know who I am." These were taken at Eleanor's 7th birthday party. Mr. O'Neill turned the page and moved the album closer to Celine, but she slid off the sofa and sat in the rocking chair by the fire. Mrs. O'Neill smiled. It was November, but unseasonably warm, so the children played outside. "Look, here's Celine. I still remember the pretty blue dress. She was so adorable and so happy." She paused a moment and turned to Brody. "Look at this. It's your Uncle Silas." Brody leaned closer to stare at a skinny boy in the photo. "Whew, he sure don't look like that now. Bald and fat, got a scruffy old beard, and spends most of his time down at the tavern on State Street. Here's your dad. See? Right beside Silas." Brody squinted at the slightly blurry face of a 5-year-old. "Now, he ain't changed so much, except for his hair, which is mostly gone. He's still skinny as a fence post." Mrs. O'Neill's eyes turned to Celine in her blue dress. She was backlit by the sun, and her hair glowed in the light. A week after the party, Celine disappeared, she told us. Eleanor cried for weeks. She's never forgotten Celine or got over her disappearance. We all looked at the girl across the room. Humming to herself, she rocked the doll. She might as well have been alone, for all the attention she paid us. Mr. O'Neill closed the album and laid it gently on the table. I was hoping, he said wearily, that seeing the pictures might make her remember, but I guess not. He excused himself, saying he had work to do in his shop. I'm building a dollhouse for my granddaughter, still hoping to finish it in time for her birthday. Maybe I'll build the next one for Celine. Mrs. O'Neill beckoned to Brody and me. You boys, come along with me. We followed her down a narrow hall to the kitchen. It was big and modern, the kind of place Mom wanted so badly. I looked through a sliding glass door to an outside deck. The snow was about 1.5 inches deep on the railing and still falling. The mountains had vanished behind a white curtain, and the woods were hard to see. Erica was out there somewhere. I told you last night I wanted to talk to you, Daniel, Mr. O'Neill said. You too, Brody. She sat on a stool at the counter, and we perched on either side of her. First of all, I've called Eleanor and told her the news. If the snow doesn't keep her from coming, she'll be here one day this week. Maybe, just maybe, she'll find a way to communicate with Celine. But what about Erica? I asked. Now that we know where she is, can we get her back? Turning to Brody, Mrs. O'Neill asked him what he knew about an old woman who lived down at the end of Railroad Avenue. Miss Perkins? Brody hunched his shoulders. She's crazy, that's what. Nobody has nothing to do with her unless it's something secret, well, I don't know exactly, except every cat and dog that goes missing ends up in her stew pot, and maybe other things too. Yes, I've heard plenty of stories myself, Mrs. O'Neill paused, but I've also heard she's a descendant of old Auntie and knows a thing or two about conjuring herself. Brody folded his arms against his skinny chest, hiding the puppy face that was knitted into the moth-eaten sweater he wore. Not to be rude or nothing, but I ain't going near that old lady, and you shouldn't either. Mrs. O'Neill turned to me. How about you, Daniel? What choice did I have? If I refused, it would be like saying I didn't care what happened to my sister. As long as somebody comes with me, I said, I'll go. I heard a whisper of sound behind me and turned to see Celine standing in the doorway. Can I come too? Oh, no, Celine, Mrs. O'Neill said. This woman, I heard you say she's kin to Auntie. Maybe she can change me for that other girl, the new one she got to help her. Then everybody'd be happy. They all want the new one back, and no one wants me. Mrs. O'Neill studied the girl's pale face. Oh, Celine, that's not true. Of course we want Erica back, but we don't want to lose you. You got to take me to see her. You got to, Celine cried. She's my onlyest chance to see Auntie again. Maybe you should be there, Mrs. O'Neill said slowly. Maybe Miss Perkins should see you. Celine leaned against the doorframe. Holding the doll tightly, she hummed to herself. It was the same tune I'd heard Erica hum, a strange, sad song, like an old ballad, but without words. I turned away from the girl's sad face. Sometimes I couldn't bear to look at her. What if my sister came back in 50 years, looking just like Celine? When should we go see Miss Perkins? I asked Mrs. O'Neill. She went to the sliding doors and peered out. The snow's letting up, she said. If the roads are plowed tonight, we can go to Woodville tomorrow. She was right. I could see the mountains again, as soft as the sky as clouds resting on earth. The trunks of trees in the woods were smudged charcoal lines on white paper. I ain't going with you, Brody said, so don't bother to ask. Nobody argued with him. It was bad enough that Celine was coming. We didn't need Brody, too. He joined Mrs. O'Neill at the door and pressed his nose against the glass, making a big smear. Bella and me should get on home soon. He didn't make a move to get his jacket or the dog, but stood watching the snow. Let me give you lunch first. How about a grilled cheese sandwich and hot chocolate? While Mrs. O'Neill fixed the sandwiches, Celine stood at the window, her back to us. From the way she held little Erica up to the glass, I guess she was showing her the snow. Mrs. O'Neill set the sandwiches and hot chocolate on the counter and called Celine. I don't want to eat with them boys. She didn't turn around, but stayed at the window, her back to the room. Well, how about if I seat you at the breakfast table over by the window? Celine agreed to that, but made sure her chair faced the window, not us. After we'd eaten, Brody thanked Mrs. O'Neill for lunch. I really ought to go home before my daddy starts into worrying about me. I said goodbye to the O'Neills and followed Brody outside. There must have been 6 inches of snow on the ground, and it was still falling. Bella leaped and danced ahead of us, barking as if the snow were the best thing she'd ever seen. My father always said it didn't take much to make a dog happy. Bella was certainly proof of that.